Hi there, welcome to a weird edition of Inde-Car. Now, I have been having a great deal of problems with YouTube today, so I thought, well, let's broadcast on this old-fashioned Facebook medium and I'll upload it to YouTube later on. In this show today, on the 26th of September, I wanted to look at several quite important issues which I'm pretty sure that the spooks on the internet don't really want me to talk about. Firstly, let me just mention something which one of my alert viewers pointed out to me. That is that Reform, the party which used to be known as UKIP, had been making significant inroads during the last general election in Scotland. That and the so-called Scottish Family Party, both of these so-called parties have been issuing a lot of what I would say was racist rhetoric, anti-immigration and migration rhetoric, and have gained a little bit of traction. So this is part of a broader international trend for right-wing parties who have been making more progress recently as people get more frustrated and feel less secure. However, we really need to put a stop to that and reiterate the fact that Scotland is not a racist country, and it will require some immigration in order for its future security to be ensured. I'll come back to that later on. Now, the other thing I wanted to speak about today was Sir Keir Starmer. And I noticed today one of the SNP's MPs in Westminster looking to reconnect with Sir Keir Starmer's Labour Party so that they deliver for Scotland. And she mentioned the Right Honourable Gentleman, which is the honorific usually given to British Prime Ministers. But as I was pointing out earlier on X, is Starmer right, honourable, or even a gentleman? I think the answer to all of those questions is no. He's a wrong, dishonourable bastard, basically, who has been wearing the clothes of a Labour politician, but essentially is carrying out a neoliberal free market Tory set of policies. In other words, none of the changes promised by his party are actually going to happen. We're going to be dished out more austerity, more poverty, less services, and basically just exactly the same drivel that we got from the Tory party. A basic diet or a gruel of not quite enough money to live on, to keep us poor enough to keep us keen and to keep us malleable and desperate enough to believe anything that they have to say. Starmer's latest creation, the so-called GB Energy company, which he gleefully was pointing out was going to be located in Aberdeen, is nothing more really than a money-making machine, a FinTech, a financial technology company, which is there essentially to make money out of Scotland's renewables for the British state, and to ensure that Scotland never gets ownership of these renewables, which of course it has anyway, but they're being removed under the guise of us being part of the United Kingdom, and none of the benefits are going to flow into Scotland at all. In fact, all of any potential job benefits are going to be located in Aberdeen, not in Glasgow, as a Labour MP in that area was claiming that there were going to be lots of new jobs in Glasgow. There simply won't be, because this energy company is going to be based in Aberdeen, where Britain has all of its oil interests and where much of the commercial activity in that city is basically governed by Britain's continuing exploitation of our offshore oil and gas and now our renewables. So this is Starmer tightening the screws in Scotland's energy resources so that we don't get any of the benefit of them and they can squander them, propping up a British state which has had 13 trillion pounds worth of oil revenues from Scotland's waters since the early 70s. And in 1979, in fact, Scotland was producing enough energy to create a massive, huge amount of income for the United Kingdom, which only at that point had an £80 billion debt, which was manageable at that time. But compare that to the trillions of pounds worth of debt that England now has, and you'll see why Starmer is so desperate for GB Energy to grab hold of Scotland's natural energy resources, such as wind power, offshore wind, tidal energy and hydro, and basically divert it all to England to make as much profit as possible, whilst not actually giving Scotland any of the profits. So that's more bad news. However, I mentioned at the beginning of this broadcast the issue of migration in Scotland, or immigration, and the controls on it. We know that Scotland's population is gradually shrinking as more people are dying than are being born. So a certain amount of immigration is actually necessary to keep Scotland's population stable, but we don't actually really need Scotland's population to grow, especially not when we become independent. Because one of the mistakes the United Kingdom has made repeatedly for decades is living beyond its means and constantly trying to expand its economy, which needs more and more migration, more and more people coming into the market to make more and more money for more and more millionaires. So it's not a sustainable model to have continued growth. To say otherwise would just be untrue. But what Scotland could do when it's independent, and which I think it must do, is develop what I would call hybrid economy, where the central resources of the country are under the control of the people's government, the people that we elect to run these resources and to ensure that we see the benefit of them in our own pockets. And I have suggested repeatedly that energy in Scotland, once we are free of the horrible union, should be renationalised, but to the point where the energy corporations which are currently harvesting our renewable energy and selling it into the market are required under a new contract to provide all of Scotland's domestic energy resources for cost. In other words, without profit. And that part of the deal would then enable them under a new contract to sell the remaining surplus energy into the open market, with a small percentage going constantly to the Scottish state itself, to a sovereign wealth fund, in a similar way to what Norway has. Now, in this way, we would all have our energy at affordable low prices all the time, and those would be set by our own government, which we elect and we would control. And any surplus energy sold onto the open market would come with a markup for us, a percentage royalty for the Scottish Sovereign Wealth Fund all the time. Now, in that way, the energy companies can still make money out of the resources that they are extracting from Scotland's territory, but the benefits are flooding both to Scotland and also any surplus profits going to these corporations. And I think that is a fair hybrid model that we could utilise. We could also do similar things with other shall we say, vital utilities such as water, which, as we know, is a valuable resource, particularly in England, where there is a shortage of potable drinking water. And that is another resource for which we could have a nationalised corporation, whose job it is to supply our water, as it does at the moment, as a right, or rather than a commodity, to us, and any surplus can be sold at a modest profit to anyone who needs it, particularly in England. But in order for Scotland to flourish successfully, I think we need to stabilise our population roughly where it is at the moment, but to build enough housing of a decent quality and provide sufficient education for all of the people migrating into Scotland that they can take up the new jobs in the new high-tech industries which this kind of hybrid model would generate. Now, this doesn't stop Scotland from having foreign trade. Now, in foreign trade, we can still export everything that we make and all the services that we provide in the way that we do now, and those commercial activities, I don't think, would be actually nationalised. They wouldn't need to be nationalised. That private sector would need to flourish by itself. But because we would be funding our country so much more from our own resources, the taxation on corporations in the private sector could be lower. And that would make it even more attractive for corporations to locate in Scotland and for new starts in Scotland to get sufficient funding to grow. All of these things are important for producing jobs. However, because of the mechanisation and the automation involved in modern industries, they're not going to provide as many what you would call manual jobs. And this is why the education of everyone in Scotland, and particularly including all new arrivals who have come to live here, to work in these industries, is so vital. So these are my sort of predictions for a potential Scotland that we could have if only in 2026 we elect the right MSPs who are prepared, when they're elected in a majority, to form a government in our Parliament which would then re-empower Holyrood. It would effectively abolish devolution forever and reinstate all Scotland's national governing powers as they were pre-1707, in fact, improved, including a modern written version of our constitution. Now, having done all of that, that would then enable the Scottish Parliament to stage a proper referendum for all of Scotland to take part in, to decide whether or not the people of Scotland in a majority would like to end the Union and perhaps negotiate a new independent Scottish treaty with our neighbours in England, which seems like the most appropriate thing to do, and I'm pretty sure that would not be a hard sell. The most important thing in the background that's going on just now is Salvo's efforts to establish Scotland's legal credibility as a sovereign state with international arbiters such as the United Nations, the international courts, and that is ongoing at the moment. Once that is achieved, in 2026 we have the opportunity to elect the first independence government that we have had since 1707, one which will re-empower our parliament so that we can hold a democratic event which the UN would then say was legitimate and would be able to supervise, and also to ensure that the rules were followed scrupulously by providing observers and advisors to make sure that all of the people of Scotland, whether they want independence or the Union, get a fair vote, and that those votes are counted not somewhere outside of Scotland, but either at the polling stations and then added to the total in a live televised event, but in some way where everybody has a receipt for their vote that says how they voted, and they can see their vote in the totalizer as it goes live. And in doing this, we can ensure that everybody knows that this democratic event has been entirely fair, that everybody has had an equal vote, and that they can see that vote in the total. That way, nobody could gainsay the result, least of all the United Kingdom, which would have no role in this whatsoever, and I believe there would have to be a blanket ban on all mainstream media coverage of the campaigning. The campaigning would need to happen at town hall level. No TV cameras, no radio, no newspaper coverage at all, other than events that are being staged for the public to listen to. Now, the opposition could hold their own rival events and they could talk to the voters in the same way, but let's remove all the disadvantages that we had in 2014, where Scotland had the entire media machine of the United Kingdom ranged against it. We had no independent media of our own. Everything was propagandised by the BBC and ITN, and we had no choice. We had to listen to the drivel coming from the No campaign, which was vastly, I would say, outnumbering all of the TV coverage that the Yes campaign got. So there are a lot of things that we need to do here, but I think the first thing to do is to accept the fact that Scotland does not need to follow the neoliberal Tory free market model. We can have a hybrid economy which allows us to take part in the global free market, but which looks after ourselves and our own population first, to make sure that nobody faces fuel poverty and nobody is forced to live on the streets. These things should be a thing of the past. This is the 21st century. Anyway, that's it from Inde-Car today on this rather impromptu broadcast on Facebook. Now, I'll post this video to my YouTube channel as soon as I get the chance. I'll also post a link to it on X. So if you're still following me all the way up to this point, thank you for doing so. Please keep donating to the Inde-Car crowdfunder on the links to my PayPal page. It is the only thing that's really keeping me in business at the moment in terms of these shows. So I look forward to having your company again on the next programme. I have no idea what it's going to be about this time, but remember, Scotland is not a racist country. We don't want reform, or formerly UKIP, anywhere near the controls of power in our parliament at all. And I think that is a warning shot again over our bows, in fact across the bows of every rational democratic thinking person in Scotland. And remember, Keir Starmer's no gentleman. He certainly isn't right or honourable, and he only has the interests of his wealthy friends and these enormously influential and wealthy donor corporations which have been propping up his party. That's it from Inde-Car today. Please keep the faith. I'll be back on your screens as soon as possible in whichever medium I can get a clear signal. I'll see you soon. Bye for now.